John Adams was the oldest of three brothers, born on October 30th, 1735, in Braintree, Massachusetts, to John and Susanna Boylston Adams. The location of Adams' birth became part of Quincy, Massachusetts in 1792. His father, a farmer and a deacon, also named John, was a fourth-generation descendant of Henry Adams, who immigrated from Barton St. David, Somerset, England, to Massachusetts Bay Colony in about 1636. His mother, Susanna Boylston Adams, was a descendant of one of the colony's most vigorous and successful families, the Boylstons of Brookline. Young John Adams went to Harvard College at age 16. His father expected him to become a minister, but Adams had doubts. After graduating in 1755, he taught school for a few years in Worcester, allowing himself to think about his career choice. After much reflection, he decided to become a lawyer and studied law in the office of a prominent lawyer in Worcester by the name of James Putnam. In 1764, Adams married Abigail Smith, the daughter of a congressional minister, Reverend William Smith, at Weymouth, Massachusetts. Their children were Abigail, future President John Quincy, Susanna, Charles, Thomas Boylston, and Elizabeth, who was stillborn. Adams was not a popular leader like his second cousin Samuel Adams. Instead, his influence emerged through his work as a constitutional lawyer and his intense analysis of historical examples, together with his thorough knowledge of the law and his dedication to the principles of republicanism. In August 1765, he anonymously contributed 4 notable articles to the Boston Gazette, republished in the London Chronicle in 1768 as True Sentiments of America. In the letter, he suggested that there was a connection between the Protestant ideas that Adams' Puritan ancestors brought to New England and the ideas behind their resistance to the Stamp Act. In the former, he explained that the opposition of the colonies to the Stamp Act was because the Stamp Act deprived the American colonists of 2 basic rights guaranteed to all Englishmen, and which all free men deserved: rights to be taxed only by consent, and to be tried only by a jury of one's peers. The Braintree Instructions were a succinct and forthright defense of colonial rights and liberties, while the dissertation was an essay in political education. In 1772, Massachusetts Governor Thomas Hutchinson announced that he and his judges would no longer need their salaries paid by the Massachusetts legislature, because the Crown would henceforth assume payment drawn from customs revenues. Boston radicals protested and asked Adams to explain their objections. In 2 replies of the Massachusetts House of Representatives to Governor Hutchinson, Adams argued that the colonists had never been under the sovereignty of Parliament. Their original charter was with the person of the king, and their allegiance was only to him. If a workable line could not be drawn between parliamentary sovereignty and the total independence of the colonies, he continued, the colonies would have no other choice but to choose independence. On May 15, 1776, the Continental Congress, in response to escalating hostilities which had commenced 13 months earlier at the battles of Lexington and Concord, urged that the colonies begin constructing their own constitutions, a precursor to becoming independent states. Today, the Declaration of Independence is remembered as the Great Revolutionary Act, but Adams and most of his contemporaries saw the Declaration as a mere formality. The resolution to draft independent constitutions was, as Adams put it, independence itself. Over the next decade, Americans from every state gathered and deliberated on new governing documents. As radical as it was to actually write constitutions, Prior conventions suggested that the society's form of government needn't be codified, nor should its organic law be written down in a single document. Unlike others, Adams thought that the definition of a republic had to do with its ends rather than its means. He wrote in Thoughts on Government, "There is no good government but what is republican, that the only valuable part of the British Constitution is so because the very definition of a republic is an empire of laws and not of men." Several congressmen turned to Adams for advice about framing new governments. Adams, tired of repeating the same thing, and published the pamphlet Thoughts on Government, which was subsequently influential in writing many state constitutions. Many historians argue that Thoughts on Government should be read as an articulation of the classical theory of mixed government. Adams contended that social classes exist in every political society, and that a good government must accept that reality. As President of the Senate, Adams cast 29 tie-breaking votes, a record that only John C. Calhoun came close to tying with 28. His votes protected the president's sole authority over the removal of appointees and influenced the location of the national capital. On at least one occasion, he persuaded senators to vote against legislation that he opposed, and he frequently lectured the Senate on procedural and policy matters. When the two political parties formed, he joined the Federalist Party, but never got on well with its leader, Alexander Hamilton. In October 1782, he negotiated with the Dutch a treaty of amity and commerce, the first such treaty between the United States and a foreign power following the 1778 treaty with France. The house that Adams purchased during this stay in the Netherlands became the first American embassy on foreign soil anywhere in the world. In 1785, John Adams was appointed the first American minister to the Court of St. James, ambassador to Great Britain. During the presidential campaign of 1796, Adams was the presidential candidate of the Federalist Party, and Thomas Pinckney, the governor of South Carolina, his running mate. The Federalists wanted Adams as their presidential candidate to crush Thomas Jefferson's bid. Most Federalists would have preferred Hamilton to be a candidate. Although Hamilton and his followers supported Adams, they also held a grudge against him. They did consider him to be the lesser of two evils. However, they thought Adams lacked the seriousness and popularity that had caused Washington to be successful, and also feared that Adams was too vain, opinionated, unpredictable, and stubborn to follow their directions. When Adams entered office, he realized that he needed to protect Washington's policy of staying out of the French and British War. Because the French helped secure American independence from Britain, they had greater popularity with America. After the Jay Treaty, the French became angry and began seizing American merchant ships that were trading with the British. Adams sent a commission to negotiate an understanding with France. However, Adams urged the Congress to augment the Navy and Army in case of diplomatic failure. Adams' 4 years as president, from 1797 to 1801, were marked by intense disputes over foreign policy. Britain and France were at war. Adams and the Federalists favored Britain, while Jefferson and the Democratic Republicans favored France. An undeclared naval war between the U.S. and France, called the Quasi-War, broke out in 1798. The humiliation of the XYZ affair, in which the French demanded huge bribes before any discussion could begin, led to serious threats of full-scale war with France and embarrassed the Jeffersonians, who were friends to France. The Federalists built up the army under George Washington and Alexander Hamilton, built warships such as the USS Constitution, and raised taxes. They cracked down on political immigrants and domestic opponents with the Alien and Sedition Acts, which were signed by Adams in 1798. These acts were composed of 4 separate and distinct units: the Naturalization Act, passed on June 18th, the Alien Act, passed on June 24th, the Alien Enemies Act, passed on July 6th, the Sedition Act, passed on July 14th. These 4 acts were brought about to suppress Republican opposition. The Naturalization Act doubled the period required to naturalize the foreign-born to American citizenship to 14 years. Since most immigrants voted Republican, they thought by initiating this act it would decrease the proportion of people who voted Republican. The Alien Friends Act and the Alien Enemies Act allowed the president to deport any foreigner he thought was dangerous to the country. The Sedition Act criminalized anyone who publicly criticized the federal government. Adams had not designed or promoted any of these acts, but he did sign them into law. The election of 1800 became a bitter and volatile battle, with each side expressing extraordinary fear of the other party and its policies. The deep division in the Federalist Party came on the Army issue. Adams was forced to name Washington as commander of the new army, and Washington demanded that Hamilton be given the second position. Adams reluctantly gave in. Major General Hamilton virtually took control of the War Department. The rift between Adams and the High Federalists grew wider. The High Federalists refused to consult Adams over the key legislation of 1798. They changed the defense measures which he had called for, demanded that Hamilton control the army, and refused to recognize the necessity of giving key Democratic Republicans like Aaron Burr senior positions in the army, which Adams wanted to do in order to gain some Democratic Republican support. By building a large standing army, the High Federalists raised popular alarms and played into the hands of the Democratic Republicans. They also alienated Adams and his large personal following. They short-sightedly viewed the Federalist Party as their own tool and ignored the need to pull together the entire nation in the face of war with France. In February 1799, Adams stunned the country by sending diplomat William Vans Murray on a peace mission to France. Napoleon, realizing the animosity of the United States was doing no good, signaled his readiness for friendly relations. The Treaty of Alliance of 1778 was superseded, and the United States could now be free of foreign entanglements, as Washington advised in his own farewell letter. Adams avoided war, but deeply split his own party in the process. In the presidential election of 1800, Adams and his running mate, Charles Cotesworthy Pinckney, went against the Republican duo of Jefferson and Burr. Hamilton tried his hardest to sabotage Adams' campaign in hopes of boosting Pinckney's chances of winning the presidency. In the end, Adams lost narrowly to Jefferson by 65 to 73 electoral votes. Among the causes of his defeat was distrust of him by High Federalists led by Hamilton, the popular disapproval of the Alien and Sedition Acts, the popularity of his opponent, Thomas Jefferson, and the effective politicking of Aaron Burr in New York State, where the legislature, which elected the Electoral College, shifted from Federalist to Republican on the basis of a few wards in New York City controlled by Burr's machine. In 1812, Adams reconciled with Jefferson. Their mutual friend, Benjamin Rush, who had been corresponding with both, encouraged Adams to reach out to Jefferson. Adams sent a brief note to Jefferson, which resulted in a resumption of their friendship. Their letters are rich in insight into both the period and the minds of the two presidents and revolutionary leaders. Their correspondence lasted 14 years and consisted of 158 letters. It was in these years that the two men discussed natural aristocracy. Jefferson said that the natural aristocracy I consider as the most precious gift of nature for the instruction, the trusts, and government of society. And indeed it would have been inconsistent in creation to have formed man for the social state, and not to have provided virtue and wisdom enough to manage the concerns of society. May we not even say that the form of government is best which provides most effectually for a pure selection of those natural aristoi into the offices of government? Adams wondered if it ever would be so clear who those people were. Your distinction between natural and artificial aristocracy does not appear to me well-founded. Birth and wealth are conferred on some men as imperiously by nature as genius, strength, or beauty. When aristocracies are established by human laws and honor, wealth, and power are made hereditary by municipal laws and political institutions, then I acknowledge artificial aristocracy to commence. It would always be true, Adams argued, that fate would bestow influence on some men for reasons other than true wisdom and virtue. That being the way of nature, he thought such talents were natural. A good government, therefore, had to account for that reality. 16 months before his death, his son, John Quincy Adams, became the 6th President of the United States, 1825 to 1829, the only son of a former president to hold the office until George W. Bush in 2001.